So what we want to know is, could Saudi Arabia soon develop a nuclear bomb? Joining us now, James Acton. He's the co-director of the Nuclear Policy Programme at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. James, thank you so much for joining us. It's just this idea, isn't it, that, away from which country it is, another country being able to enrich uranium is very alarming for a generation that's got used to the idea that we should be reducing the number of countries that can enrich uranium.
And that's been a long-standing tenet of US non-proliferation policy. The United States has worked extremely hard over the course of 50, 60 years to try to prevent other states from acquiring enrichment technology. And that's because the same technology that can produce low-enriched uranium for a reactor can produce highly enriched uranium for a nuclear weapon. So in general, it's important to prevent the spread of this technology. And it's particularly important to prevent its spread to potential proliferators. Senior Saudi officials have said very overtly, very explicitly, that if Iran gets the bomb, they will get the bomb too. And this is the means for them to do so. So I agree with Congressman Garamendi. I think this is just terrible policy.
And as I understand it, there's no plan for oversight here either.
I don't think that's quite right. The specific issue is something called the Additional Protocol. This is a IAEA, International Atomic Energy Safeguards document that gives the agency particular rights to inspect undeclared sites. Now, the reporting, and we haven't seen the US agreement with Saudi Arabia yet, so this is all a touch speculative right now. But the reporting is that Saudi Arabia has refused to accept an additional protocol. Apparently, it has its normal safeguards agreement with the IAEA. Apparently, it's agreeing to some kind of bilateral safeguards with the United States as well. But the first thing is the additional protocol is really important, and I think it's a serious weakness that Saudi is not accepting it. But even if Saudi had accepted the additional protocol, I still think enrichment in Saudi Arabia would be a really bad idea.
The question we were asking, could Saudi Arabia soon develop a nuclear bomb? What's your answer to that? Because obviously they've liaised very closely with Pakistan about nuclear weapons, so they've got the knowledge there, presumably.
We don't know how much knowledge, if any, Pakistan has transferred to Saudi Arabia. But the big picture is, once Saudi has enrichment technology, if indeed it ultimately gets that technology, it will have the single most important technology for building nuclear weapons. With an enrichment plant that's sized for a commercial reactor, you can produce enough highly enriched uranium for a nuclear weapon within days, frankly. The scale of enrichment plant that you need for nuclear weapons is actually much smaller than the scale that you need for a bomb. So Saudi would have the ability to build the highly enriched uranium, to manufacture the highly enriched uranium for a nuclear weapon very quickly. There's a bunch of other activities you have to do to build a bomb. Realistically, one might be looking at a year or two after Saudi has enrichment technology. But this would be a key enabler. It's the most important enabling technology on the way to the bomb.
Joining me now, Admiral James Stavridis, CNN senior military analyst and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. I think for those of us who were raised post 9/11, this feels really surprising and maybe almost out of left field. But I realize there may be security reasons this is happening. Can you talk about how this has been talked about prior to this point? Like, how did we get here?
It's been a conversation ongoing for well over a decade. The idea of not a nuclear weapon, and we need to be clear here, we're talking about nuclear power, civilian use of nuclear power, but yes, concerning anytime there's proliferation and a nation gets that ability to enrich, and of course that's what we don't want Iran to have. So why Saudi Arabia? Short answer, we want to stay very aligned with the Saudis. Point two, Saudi Arabia already has a very close relationship with Pakistan and a reasonable relationship with Russia. So I think part of the conversation here, and I agree with this, is better we should work with the Saudis. They're going to get this capability. And I'll close with this. If you're the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who you're showing here, Mohammed bin Salman, and you look at your neighborhood, and Israel has nuclear power and nuclear weapons. Iran has nuclear power and is striving for a nuclear weapon. I think the minimum for you as a responsible leader of the kingdom is to get to nuclear power and do it in concert with the United States.
And just because you mentioned the name of MBS, of course, plenty of people have talked about the human rights history in Saudi Arabia. They are the global leader in executions, a lot of cracking down on online speech. And then, of course, best known in the U.S., 2018 sanctioned the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And I think I want to help better understand this relationship. How is Trump different in his approach with Saudi Arabia than Biden?
The Trump administration is willing to move further along in close alignment with the kingdom. And let's back up 3 years ago, Audi, when the horrific events of October of 23 occurred. What happened right before that? Right before that, the Biden administration was trying to bring the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Israel together in formal recognition of each other. This is an extension of Trump 1, the so-called Abraham Accords. So there's been a bipartisan consensus through both Biden and Trump to try and bring the kingdom closer to Israel and to keep it aligned with the United States. This is a logical extension of both of those.
So I want to play one last thing for you then. Naftali Bennett, former Israeli prime minister. Here is his reaction to this.
Saudi Arabia gets nuclear capabilities without progress towards normalization, without anything in return. In all of these, Israel is not at the table, but on the table.
Just want to add that one more point. As you said, on the one hand, you want to get to a path of normalization. On the other hand, not sounding happy.
Completely agree with Naftali Bennett. I know all of the senior Israeli leaders. They are all going to want to see concrete progress toward that alignment you and I just talked about before the kingdom gets to the enrichment. So let's look at the details of the deal. Let's look at the timeline. Let's listen to the Israelis. I think if we do all those things, we can probably achieve the overarching objectives here.
President Trump just adding a new condition on a nuclear deal they just signed yesterday with Saudi Arabia that could upend that agreement. His post says that Saudi Arabia must join the Abraham Accords. CNN senior White House reporter Betsy Klein is with me now. Just give us some context. This was not part of the initial deal, at least none of us has seen the whole thing, but the Abraham Accords was not a demand made on the deal signed yesterday, correct?
No, Sarah, we really didn't have the full text of that deal, and we're working to get more details on this, but the ink was barely dry as President Trump now putting this new condition on this nuclear agreement with Saudi Arabia. This had been a major win for the kingdom. It was expected to give them a civilian nuclear program, and it could lead the kingdom to be able to enrich its own fuel for civilian reactors. It was signed just yesterday evening by Energy Secretary Chris Wright and his Saudi counterpart after being approved formally by President Trump after months of negotiations. The deal would last 30 years. It is expected to generate tens of billions of dollars for U.S. companies that would assist with expertise and technology there. But the president now saying that the country must sign on to the Abraham Accords. He says in this new post to media, quote, "The civil nuclear deal being made between the United States Department of Energy and Saudi Arabia, which pertains only to non-military use such as the ones that Iran and UAE and others already have, will be approved but is totally subject to Saudi Arabia joining the very respected and successful Abraham Accords. The United States is not opposed to civil non-enriched nuclear facilities. Historically, Saudi Arabia has been resistant to efforts to join the Abraham Accords. That is that deal that was struck during the president's first term and then expanded during his second for Middle Eastern countries to set up diplomatic relations with Israel. Criticism from Israel about this nuclear deal had already come in from top officials. Also on Capitol Hill, it was expected to generate some criticism on both sides of the aisle. The agreement has to be sent to Congress for a review. It's possible they are able to block that, but we have asked the White House what this means for the future of this deal, whether it will go into effect. No answer yet, Sarah.
Betsy Klein, thank you as well, always, for your great reporting there at the White House.